Breaking. Princess Leonor's shocking royal wedding decision sends Europe into chaos. It begins in the most ordinary way imaginable. A quiet morning at Zarzuela Palace, sunlight slipping through the tall windows, staff walking briskly through the hallways, and the entire country expecting yet another carefully controlled royal update about the wedding of Spain's future queen. Everything looked normal, predictable, the calm before an expected celebration. But then something happened that shattered every expectation. Because instead of announcing another carefully prepared decision, something Spain could easily absorb, Princess Leonor made a choice so unexpected, so bold, and so controversial, that within minutes, Europe was scrambling for answers. Commentators panicked. Diplomats began calling each other in disbelief. Newsrooms went into chaos. And behind the scenes, palace officials were urgently rewriting statements they didn't know they'd need. And here's the part almost no one saw coming. The decision wasn't impulsive, it wasn't emotional, and it wasn't reckless. It was deliberate, calculated, and deeply personal, shaped by secrets, private conversations, and pressures that the world only now is beginning to understand. And to uncover the truth, we need to step into Leonor's world, into the heart of a monarchy trying to survive 2025, and into a family still struggling with what it means to hand the future to a daughter who refuses to be controlled. This is the story behind the decision that sent Europe into chaos. Let's begin. Princess Leonor has always lived under an impossible spotlight. Since birth, every gesture, every word, every future step was measured, analyzed, and compared to monarchs past and present. But in 2025, as Spain prepares for her historic marriage, the first for a future queen in more than a century, the pressure surrounding her has grown beyond anything she could have anticipated. And at the center of this pressure lies one question: will her wedding unite Europe, or tear it apart? From the moment the wedding was announced, European royals, political leaders, and powerful institutions all began maneuvering behind the scenes. Invitations became negotiations. Alliances were tested. Old tensions quietly resurfaced. And through it all, Leonor watched, listened, and tried to find her own voice in a storm that seemed determined to drown it. But then came the breaking point. A closed-door meeting at Zarzuela. A conversation that was never meant to be public. A moment where Leonor, calm, composed, and surprisingly firm, told her parents something they didn't expect. She wasn't going to follow the traditional royal script. She wasn't going to let Europe dictate the conditions of her wedding. And she certainly wasn't going to let political pressure decide who she was allowed to love, honor, or stand beside on the most important day of her life. Her decision was simple in words, but explosive in impact. She announced that she was changing one of the most symbolic, politically sensitive, and historically important elements of the royal wedding, an element that European leaders were already quietly arguing over. And once that decision was made, the consequences were immediate. Phones rang across European capitals. Entire teams were called into urgent meetings. News outlets cut into regular programming. Analysts were shaken. Some countries were offended. Others were relieved. And social media erupted into a storm of questions, speculations, and conspiracy threads. What could possibly cause this level of chaos? To understand, we need to walk deeper. For months, the palace had been preparing a wedding that symbolized unity between Spain and Europe, a carefully balanced, politically neutral event designed to strengthen relationships, calm critics, and symbolize a monarchy stepping confidently into the future. Every detail was aligned with international expectations. But Leonor saw something else. She saw European pressure overshadowing her own wishes. She saw political deals shaping her celebration. She saw the weight of monarchy demanding she put duty over love, symbolism over sincerity, and alliances over authenticity. And she refused. Her decision directly challenged European expectations. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about identity, autonomy, and a new era for Spain's monarchy, one led by a queen who would not be controlled. But while she was prepared for conflict, she wasn't prepared for what came next. Within hours, European analysts began calling it an unprecedented royal disruption. Some said it was irresponsible. Others called it revolutionary. And as the news spread, even nations with historically strong ties to Spain began questioning what this meant for future treaties, future events, future diplomatic gestures. And here, the story takes an emotional turn. Because while Europe erupted, Leonor wasn't thinking about political shockwaves. She was thinking about her family, specifically, the private reaction of King Felipe and Queen Letizia. Felipe, a monarch trained to balance duty with emotion, was torn. On one hand, he understood his daughter's desire for autonomy. On the other, he knew the diplomatic consequences would be enormous. Letizia, always protective of Leonor's independence, supported her, but also feared the backlash. The room that morning was filled with tension. But beneath the tension was something far more powerful: love. A family trying to navigate tradition, responsibility, and the painful truth that a future queen cannot live the way a daughter once did. But Leonor held her ground. She explained, calmly and courageously, why she made her decision. And in that moment, her parents saw not a child breaking rules, but a queen stepping forward. And yet, the chaos outside the palace walls did not slow down. European councils called for explanations. International news channels framed the story as Europe's royal crisis. Commentators argued non-stop, and some former royals even inserted themselves into the debate, claiming Leonor's decision was a sign of a monarchy losing control. But the truth, as you'll see, was far more nuanced. Let's dive deeper. Why exactly was this decision so controversial? What tradition did Leonor break? What expectation did she defy? And why were certain European capitals so furious? It begins with the location and symbolism of the wedding. For years, European elites expected Leonor's wedding to follow a particular model, one that reinforced the historical ties between Spain and its royal counterparts. The palace had been discussing a specific venue that carried significant diplomatic meaning. But Leonor didn't choose it. She didn't want a stage built for political alliances. She wanted something personal, something that reflected her life, not Europe's expectations. Her choice shocked diplomatic circles because it removed symbolic power from those who wanted it most. It stripped away the illusion of a shared European narrative and replaced it with a deeply personal Spanish story, hers. And this is where everything exploded. Because Leonor's decision didn't just change the wedding. It challenged decades of royal tradition, disrupted quiet diplomatic agreements, and sent a clear message: Spain's future queen will rule on her own terms. Europe wasn't ready for that. What followed were heated calls, urgent statements, and waves of online speculation. Some said Europe feared Spain was becoming too independent. Others argued that certain royal houses felt slighted, overlooked, or intentionally pushed aside. But here's the twist. Behind closed doors, several European royals understood Leonor's decision perfectly, and even supported her privately. They knew how suffocating royal expectations can be. They knew what it meant to lose personal agency. They saw the courage it took to challenge an entire system. And yet, publicly, chaos continued. In the midst of all this noise, Leonor did something unexpected. She remained silent, not defensive, not emotional, not reactive, just silent. And that silence was louder than any statement she could have made. Because the more she stayed quiet, the more Europe realized the truth: this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a moment of confusion. It was leadership, a new kind of leadership. But let's step back again, because we still haven't touched the emotional core of this story. Leonor's decision had a personal ripple effect inside the palace. It stirred fear, pride, disappointment, and admiration. Her father wrestled with the weight of being both king and father. Letizia felt a protective instinct rise stronger than ever. Sofia watched her sister face the world alone and understood, maybe for the first time, what being heir truly means. And Leonor, she felt everything at once. Fear of backlash, relief in being true to herself, sadness knowing she had disrupted peace, courage knowing she was choosing her own path. And yet she stood firm. Now let's explore the diplomatic side, the part the public rarely sees. European governments rely on royal events to strengthen relationships, soften political tensions, and create symbolic unity. Leonor's decision disrupted that carefully constructed dance. Some felt insulted, some felt ignored, some felt threatened. But the hidden truth is that Leonor's choice also revealed which nations were truly aligned with Spain, and which were using symbolism as leverage. It exposed the fragile nature of European politics in 2025. And it exposed how desperately Europe wanted to control a future queen. But Leonor refused to be controlled. Now, let's go into the part of the story that shocked even palace insiders. There was a second decision. One even more personal. One that Europe still hasn't fully understood. One that will reshape the monarchy for years to come. Leonor insisted on limiting political influence in her marriage protocol, meaning the arrangements, vows, guest list, and ceremonial components would not be shaped by diplomatic pressure. In royal history, this is almost unheard of. And that's why Europe panicked. Because a queen who chooses love over politics becomes unpredictable. But here's the deeper truth. Leonor wasn't rejecting Europe. She was rejecting control. She wasn't pushing nations away. She was claiming ownership of her future. And in doing so, she sent a shockwave through every royal house watching her. Now, as we move into the heart of this story, let's talk about the emotional heartbeat, the moment inside Zarzuela Palace when King Felipe realized what was truly happening. This decision was not a rebellion. It was a transformation. His daughter was no longer the child he protected. She was now the queen he would one day follow. And in that realization, Felipe did something powerful. He supported her, quietly, carefully, but firmly. And that support changed everything. Now the palace stands in a strange, uncharted territory. Europe is adjusting. Critics are calming. Allies are reaching out privately. And the public is fascinated. Because in a world where tradition often suffocates identity, Princess Leonor did the one thing no one expected. She chose herself. And that choice, brave, controversial, emotional, is exactly what will define her reign. As Spain watches the preparations for her historic wedding unfold, one thing is now clear: this isn't just a royal event. It's a declaration, a shift, a new era for the monarchy. And Europe will have no choice but to adapt. Because the future Queen of Spain has already proven she will lead with courage, authenticity, and a voice entirely her own. And that is why her decision sent Europe into chaos.